Hello everybody and welcome to another Doctor Who review. This time it's a Big Finish audio drama, The Eye of the Scorpion. Being a Big Finish audio drama review, this is an audio review. So you can listen to it in the car or wherever you want. Anyway, moving on, let's get to the story. Quick synopsis of my idea of the plot line. I don't have a television companion for these stories. And then we'll go into the characters, some of the bits I like, some of the bits I didn't like. Let's get into the review and see what I thought of this Big Finish story. It is the 24th Big Finish audio monthly adventure, starring the 5th Doctor Peter Davison, Nicola Bryant as Peri, and Caroline Morris as Erimem, the new companion. So the Doctor and Peri land in ancient Egypt after the TARDIS is knocked off course slightly by something that's been programmed by the Doctor, although that confuses him at the time because he hadn't quite done it yet. They arrive in Egypt and they arrive at a time of a chase. A girl in a chariot is being chased. The Doctor intervenes, stops the man from pursuing, and then uses the chariots that he knocks the man off of to go and get this lady and calm down her very frightened horses. The lady herself is the soon-to-be pharaoh Erimem. She was trying to get back to Thebes, where her palace is based. Erimem has just inherited the pharaohship after her brothers had died and her father had died of natural causes, maybe a bit more mysterious than that. Women aren't really seen as ones to rule in Egypt, and there's already plots abound for Erimem to be overthrown. One of them is led by Janus, a lord who has ambitions of his own. It turns out, though, that he has been taken over by an alien entity he's managed to uncover in the middle of the Egyptian desert. This entity takes over minds very slowly and has reproductive powers that telepathically can take over the minds of others. Other members of this clan include Horemshep, Theum, and eventually Peri, as the virus this alien creature seems to possess is transmittable by touch. The Doctor contrives a plan where Erimem, Peri and the Doctor go down into the tombs under the Sphinx, where Janus, Horemshep and Theum follow. It seems the Doctor has been trying to get all the different aspects of this creature into the one mind, into Peri's mind, and using that has started to confuse it to take it out of its place. And using a device which helps tap into psychic forces, the Doctor manages to subdue the entity. Erimem, hearing over the stories of the Doctor and realising that maybe she isn't pharaoh material, decides to join them and does so at the end of the story. That's a quick synopsis and summary of Eye of the Scorpion. Let's go through some of the characters and cast of this story. So we start off, of course, with the 5th Doctor, Peter Davison. You can tell this is the end of Davison's era. He's a bit more proactive. He did have his suspicions very much of the whole situation with the Egyptians, and he had a sense there was an alien entity there from the start. Maybe his telepathic abilities coming through. Peter Davison, what he gets written, it's very nice to see. It's very nice to have that acting. I think he's got out of this reading from the page but he was doing initially, and he's come into more of his own, and the character's become more mature, and he's got back into the character quite well, and it really works in this one. It's all the 5th Doctor qualities you see. The fact the 5th Doctor's out of action for an episode because all these different assassins managed to cap the Doctor at one point with a poison that he has, and this idea of the Doctor being able to use his Time Lord abilities comes up quite a lot in Peter Davison's Big Finish audios of this era. So it's interesting, this is one of the first instances of that. And yeah, overall, Peter Davison plays it very well. We then have Nicola Bryant playing Peri. The thing with Peri joining the Doctor with the adventures that she is now, it kind of develops a relationship you don't really see formed on screen between Planet of Fire and Case of Androzani. It's an opportunity for Big Finish to expand onto the lore a little bit there, and this is the first time that Peri is going to be joined by another companion, which makes it even more interesting. Yeah, she briefly had Turlo in her first story, but she didn't end up travelling through time and space with him. It happened to be just in that place of Sarn, really. which was all part of the plot, and she was the character that came in. It's nice to have Nicola Bryant have that turn like that, and she does a good job with what the script she gets. She gets a little bit more later on, and she ends up using a natural voice for the possessed Peri when the creature's involved and trying to break free and trying to control Peri later on when all the entity's elements get funneled into her. The nicer way she gets performed that, and it's nice to see that she gets a little bit extra here. Peri is the usual argumentative, spunky Peri that we know, but you can tell already that she cares and is concerned for the Doctor, and the rapport she builds up with Erimem is actually very well done. I quite like that, and you can see why they were put together in that respect, because they're a good little team, the two of them, and they work very well with the Fifth Doctor. We then have Caroline Morris playing Erimem. Erimem is an interesting character. Caroline Morris plays Erimem with this kind of high and mighty kind of outlook on life. Very inquisitive though. I do like the way Erimem comes across. You do get the sense though she'd be a bit of a handful, which you see in later stories, because she has a very strong will. And it does make me think more of the kind of, it's not quite a feminist vibe, but it's more something that you would got in the 70s Doctor companions, and even an element of Tegan in there, of Erimem's portrayal. It's interesting having a character out of time. It's nice to see, because at this era there's a lot of modern day companions starting to kick in at this point. So it's interesting seeing another human, but a human from the past, coming in and actually seeing the whole travels of the TARDIS through her eyes, more than the eyes of Peri, who is more of a modern identification figure. It is interesting how that all works, and I think Caroline Morris is actually a very good companion. She's not quite as good a new companion as Evelyn is, played by Maggie Stables, in the Sixth Doctor's adventures, but, you know, Caroline Morris is a good substitute, a good second, and considering they are the third companion created for Big Finish, I think she actually works better with the Doctor of the Fifth Doctor than Charlie sometimes does with the Eighth Doctor. So this new companion being created again is really working. I quite like the way that she comes across, and it's quite fun. I quite like the way Erimem's headstrongness, but her intelligence comes through, and I think Caroline Morris plays it quite well. We then have Yanis, played by Harry Myers. Now, I recognise Harry Myers' voice because I've listened to some of the Big Finish Benny Summerfield audios, and he plays Adrian. But he certainly comes across as the big tough guy in this one, and it shows. I think you need that kind of powerful, gruff voice that comes across for Yanis. And he is a bit of a head case, and it's played very well by Harry Myers because of that. And I do like the way it's portrayed. I think it's quite a nice little role that we have here for Harry Myers to play as Yanis, and it's nice to see that Yanis has quite a substantial part as the big bad of this story, and it's interesting how he is so wild that even the creature who's trying to control him can't really control them. I thought that was quite an interesting little aspect there, and it's played very well by Harry Myers. You then have Jack Gallagher playing Fayum. Fayum is kind of played, I mean, Jack Gallagher's playing somebody of the same age range as Erimem is. You get the impression Erimem is 17, and you get the impression that Fayum is fairly close to that age, and it's interesting how that comes up. I quite like the way that it's played by Jack Gallagher. He seems quite believable as Fayum, and it works for me for that case, and I think it's quite a nice little role overall that Fayum is kind of able to be moulded a bit more with this creature, and the fact he's effectively the puppet they want to use as a replacement male pharaoh, with this whole backstory of Erimem was not the only child of the old pharaoh. There was another one in his concubine of women, because Erimem has about 30 stepmothers. It's quite interesting that they tried to use Fayum as the way of trying to supersede Erimem at one point. Doesn't quite work, but it's a nice way of projecting, because the Doctor kind of stops it. And Fayum works quite well throughout the story. It's a nice counterbalance to the machinations, and the fact he's taken over later on gives a slightly different side to the character. We then have Jonathan Owen, who plays Antranak. Antranak's actually quite good, and he pairs off quite well with Horemshep. Them two bounce off each other quite well. Horemshep's played by Stephen Perrin. Jonathan Owen's playing an older, more reserved advisor, but loyalist to the Pharaoh. And you can tell he's a wily old goat, if you want to put it that way. A wily old snake. It works quite well. I like the way that Jonathan Owen works overall. He's a nice little balance to Erimem's strong will she has. And it's nice to have that kind of balance between the two. I actually quite like the way that Jonathan Owen plays Antronak, and you actually root for him at one point because he's actually quite a powerful figure. Even though he has a bit of distrust of the Doctor coming in and being whimsical and saving Erimem a couple of times, he does start to appreciate him, which is really nice. In regards to Stephen Perrin and Horemshep, I think it's actually a nice little performance there. And Horemshep is the High Priest, and it's quite nice the way they balance off each other, Antronak and Horemshep. And when Horemshep gets taken over later on, because he's effectively the mole in Thebes, which is how Yanis is finding out how all the plans are happening and he's able to counteract them as this marauding army on the outside. Horemshep is played with a kind of slight deviousness against him, and it works quite well, and I quite like the way it's put across, and I like the whole setup that's been put here with the story. I think it's quite nice overall. Good bits of this story. I think the premise is quite nice, kind of pseudo-historical. The fact that it's based in Egypt, the fact the Doctor knows his origin of Egypt. I like the little plays and the fact that Peri quite comically makes Napoleon face the new face of the Sphinx at the end, because the Sphinx gets damaged as part of the attacks that happen near the end. The whole knowledge that the Doctor has of medicines and murder and poison that comes in here, it really is a nice little mystery and to get the Doctor's teeth into here. I think the threat of Yanis is well played. I think it's well written. I don't think there's any doubt that Yanis can do what he says he does, and I think it really helps the way that the character is portrayed. When it comes to the bits I'm not quite sure of, I think the audio is a little bit iffy at times. You get the scorpions that come in at times, which is where the creature initially had its mental capacity come from, because it was kind of like a stasis chamber that was found by Yanis, and it was for the scorpions, and this is where the sentient energy comes in from. I think the scorpions is an interesting sound, but it needs to be described for me to understand it's actually a scorpion we're talking about here that's making that noise. So that's maybe just my knowledge more than anything else, but it's an interesting way of putting it across. It's intriguing how that works, but it works. Overall, I like the story as a whole. It's nicely well paced by Ian McLaughlin. I think it's a nice little full-flowing story. It keeps you going every episode. I think the twist with Peri being a spy to make the cliffhanger was a bit surprising, but the way it's explained rather quickly within about 5 minutes is actually pretty good. And I quite like the way it's explained by the Doctor and how the Doctor's sussed effectively what's happening a long time ago. You kind of get the idea he has when he blocks out the sun using the TARDIS in episode 3, which is why the TARDIS went on course, because he managed to telepathically communicate with the TARDIS at certain time periods so it goes across the sun to try and disprove Horemshep's idea of Fayum being the new god, and using his knowledge of Egyptian deities to try and play and help Erimem for the third time in that story by that point. It's actually quite nice, and I quite like the way that's written out. And there's a nice few elements here. I think the direction by Gary Russell is quite nice and quite neat. It's quite controlled, as most of Gary Russell's stuff is, but it works for me, and I think it's a nice little direction. All the characters are allowed to breathe. It does need a bit of guidance, because it's a little bit confusing at times if you don't quite concentrate on the story in regards to some of the elements they're talking about. They do try and explain the Egyptian mythology as best they can, but you do need to be listening a little bit to this one to actually get the full enjoyment of this. So Gary Russell does a good job of making sure that you do get that audio journey, because some audio dramas sometimes you don't quite get that, but this one you do, you understand it. There could have been a bit more of the sound design being a bit more sounding like Egypt. It sounds more like a studio with occasional sound effect in it than actually anything that would indicate you are in there, and I think that's the downside. But the music itself by David Darlington is not quite 80s. It's actually more a modern, at the time, a more modern type of soundtrack. It doesn't quite work on the 80s, and that's interesting because a lot of the early Big Finishes work on a soundtrack that's very similar to the era that the Doctor came from. This one isn't. It's more punctuates and gets the tension up and it helps move along the story at the points it needs, but it's not using any kind of in period music types. It's kind of a more early 2000s kind of feel to it, the way it works. But it works well, and I quite like the way it's put across because of that, and it doesn't interfere with it. The music's quite well handled and well positioned, and I quite like it overall. It doesn't detract from the story. I did enjoy the story. I think the story is actually quite a romp in some respects. It's not an easy listen. You do have to concentrate a little bit, but what you do get out of that is a great satisfaction and enjoyment for the story. I think Ian McLaughlin set up a very good base for Erimem, which does carry on and develop in the later stories we see of Erimem, and I like the whole story overall. It's enjoyable enough. It's not take your brain out. It definitely has got a bit more to it. It's not high, it's not the greatest story in the world, but it certainly is enjoyable enough to be a good story. I'm going to give it a kind of slightly conservative 3.5 TARDISes out of 5. Okay, let's see how that story stacks up with the rest of the Big Finish reviews I have done so far. The Eye of the Scorpion sits in with a plethora of other Big Finish audio reviews, rated at 3.5 TARDISes out of 5. A selection of which include The Sirens of Time, Whispers of Terror, The Fires of Vulcan, The Holy Terror, Storm Warning, Minuet in Hell, and Blood Tide. At the bottom are still 2 stories with 3 TARDISes out of 5. They are The Land of the Dead and Winter for the Adept. And the best story reviewed so far with 4.5 TARDISes out of 5 is The Apocalypse Element. That's it from me. What did you think of The Eye of the Scorpion? Leave a comment down below. Did you like it? Leave a comment down below. Did you not like it? Leave a comment down below. And if you like this review, please like it. Share it with the hashtag teamstructor. And also, if you like the channel as a whole, hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you know when a new video comes out. General rule, new video every Sunday at 4 PM GMT. I'm back next week with the Christmas review. It is Matt Smith's A Christmas Carol. That's Sunday at 4 PM GMT. Hopefully you can join me for that. Until next time though, guys, thanks so much for watching, and do you know what? I'll see you and I will speak to you later.